The office was quiet, too quiet for a Thursday evening. The hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed louder than usual, filling the silence with a sterile buzz. Outside the window, the city was winding down, car headlights streaked across the street, and the faint murmur of traffic drifted upward. But inside, the lawyer sat alone, her desk buried beneath stacks of documents, case files, and legal pads scribbled with notes. She rubbed her temples, exhaustion pressing against her skull. The divorce case had consumed her for weeks, every detail combed through, every testimony rehearsed. Her client's story had been harrowing, years of abuse, manipulation, and fear. The lawyer had believed her, believed every word, because the bruises seemed real, the trembling voice seemed genuine, and the desperation in her eyes had been unmistakable. Now, as she flipped through the thick pile of affidavits, something gnawed at her. A whisper of doubt. A shadow of suspicion. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at the screen, an unknown number. For a moment she considered ignoring it, but instinct told her otherwise. She picked up. Hello? A pause. Then a voice, low and hesitant, "You don't know me, but you need to be careful. Your client, she's not telling you the truth." The lawyer froze. Who is this? I can't say. But check the dates. The hospital records. The police reports. They don't match her story. The line went dead. She sat there, staring at the phone, her pulse quickening. Anonymous calls were nothing new in her line of work, angry spouses, bitter relatives, even pranksters, but this one felt different. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Her eyes drifted back to the documents. She pulled out the hospital report, flipping through the pages. The admission date was March 12. Her client had sworn under oath that the incident occurred on March 15. A small discrepancy, perhaps, but in court, small cracks could shatter entire cases. She leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking beneath her. Was it possible her client had simply misremembered? Trauma could distort timelines. Victims often confuse dates, details, even faces. She had seen it before. But something about the precision of the warning unsettled her. She reached for another file, the police statement. Again, the dates didn't align. The officer's report mentioned a call made at 9 p.m., but her client had testified it was closer to midnight. Her stomach tightened. She stood, pacing the office, the shadows stretching long across the carpet. The walls, lined with certificates and framed degrees, seemed to watch her, silently questioning her judgment. She had built her career on ethics, on integrity, on fighting for truth even when it was inconvenient. And now, the truth itself seemed to be slipping through her fingers. The phone buzzed again. This time it was her paralegal. Still working? The voice asked, light, almost teasing. Yes, she replied, forcing calm. Just reviewing the case. You should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be intense. I know. She hesitated, then added, have you noticed anything odd in the documents? A pause. Odd? No. Why? Never mind, she said quickly. I'll see you in the morning. She hung up, unwilling to share her doubts. Doubt was dangerous. Doubt could unravel everything. She returned to the desk, pulling the files closer, her pen scratching across the margins as she circled inconsistencies. The more she looked, the more the cracks widened. Witness statements contradicted each other. Timelines overlapped in impossible ways. Even the photographs, grainy, poorly lit, raised questions. Her heart pounded. Could it be true? Could her client have fabricated the entire story? She remembered their first meeting. The woman had sat across from her, hands trembling, eyes red from crying. She had spoken of nights filled with terror, of bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, of a husband whose rage knew no bounds. The lawyer had felt compassion, anger, and resolve. She had promised to fight for her, to protect her, to bring justice. And now, that promise felt like a trap. She picked up the phone, tempted to call her client to demand answers. But she stopped herself. Confrontation without proof would only push her further into lies. She needed evidence, something undeniable. Her gaze fell on the mediation notes. The opposing counsel had hinted at inconsistencies, subtle jabs during cross-examination, but she had dismissed them as tactics. Perhaps she shouldn't have. Perhaps they had seen what she refused to see. The office clock ticked loudly, each second a reminder of the weight pressing down on her. She sat again, her fingers tracing the edges of the documents. She thought of the courtroom tomorrow, of the judge's stern gaze, of the oath she had sworn to uphold justice. Justice. The word echoed in her mind, heavy, unforgiving. She closed her eyes, imagining the gavel striking, the verdict delivered. She imagined herself standing there, victorious, her client free from the chains of abuse. But the image twisted, warped, until victory became betrayal, and freedom became fraud. Her phone buzzed once more. Another message, this time a text, "She's lying. Don't let her fool you." No sender. No trace. Just words, stark and chilling. She exhaled sharply, her resolve hardening. She would not ignore this. She would dig deeper, even if it meant unraveling her own case. The office felt colder now, the shadows darker. She gathered the files, stacking them neatly, her movements deliberate. Tomorrow, she would walk into court prepared. Not just to defend, but to question. Not just to argue, but to uncover. She turned off the desk lamp, leaving the room in dim light. As she reached for her coat, she glanced once more at the documents. They seemed to stare back at her, silent witnesses to a truth she had yet to fully grasp. Her reflection in the window caught her eye, tired, determined, haunted. She saw not just a lawyer, but a guardian of justice, standing at the edge of betrayal. And she knew, deep down, that the battle ahead would not be against an abusive husband, but against the very client she had sworn to protect. The courtroom was alive with tension, a living organism of whispers, shuffling papers, and the occasional cough that echoed against the high ceilings. The air smelled faintly of varnished wood and old books, a mixture of tradition and authority. The lawyer sat at her table, her files neatly stacked, her pen poised like a weapon. She had spent the night dissecting every inconsistency, every fragile thread of her client's testimony, but now there was no room for hesitation. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise." The judge entered, robes flowing, face stern and unreadable. Everyone stood, the ritual heavy with meaning. When the judge sat, the room followed, and silence fell like a curtain. Her client sat beside her, hands clasped tightly, eyes darting nervously. The lawyer glanced at her, searching for reassurance, but found only fear. Fear could be genuine. Fear could also be manufactured. She pushed the thought aside. The opposing counsel rose first, a tall man with sharp features and a voice that carried authority. He spoke of contradictions, of unreliable testimony, of motives hidden beneath the surface. His words were precise, each syllable designed to plant doubt in the judge's mind. The lawyer listened, her jaw tight, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. She had anticipated this. She had prepared for this. When he sat, she rose, her presence commanding, her voice steady. "Your Honor," she began, "we are here today not merely to dissolve a marriage, but to confront a cycle of abuse that has left scars deeper than any document can reveal." She walked slowly toward the bench, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She held up the hospital records, the photographs, the sworn statements. Each piece of evidence was presented with deliberate care, her words weaving them into a narrative of suffering and survival. Her client's eyes filled with tears, and the courtroom leaned in, captivated. The opposing counsel objected, claiming exaggeration, but the judge allowed her to continue. She turned to the witness stand, where her client now sat, trembling but resolute. "Tell us," she said softly, "what happened that night." The woman spoke, her voice breaking, recounting the violence, the fear, the desperate call for help. The courtroom was silent, every ear tuned to her words. The lawyer watched closely, noting the tremor in her voice, the way her hands twisted in her lap. Genuine? Or rehearsed? The doubt lingered, but she pressed on. She cross-examined the opposing witnesses, dismantling their credibility piece by piece. She highlighted inconsistencies in their accounts, questioned their motives, exposed their biases. Her questions were sharp, her tone unwavering. The opposing counsel fought back, but she countered with precision, her arguments layered with logic and emotion. She spoke not only to the judge but to the conscience of the room, painting a picture of injustice that demanded correction. Hours passed, the battle unfolding like a chess match. Each move calculated, each response measured. The lawyer felt the weight of her oath pressing against her, the responsibility to uphold truth gnawing at her resolve. Yet she pushed forward, driven by the momentum of the case, by the need to protect her client, or at least the image of her client she had built. Finally, it was time for closing arguments. She stood tall, her voice firm. Your Honor, justice is not blind to suffering. It does not ignore the cries of those who have been silenced. My client has endured years of torment, years of fear, years of pain. Today, you have the power to end that cycle. To grant her freedom. To restore her dignity. Her words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. The opposing counsel rose, delivering his own closing, but his arguments seemed weaker now, overshadowed by the emotional weight of her plea. The judge sat in silence for a moment, eyes scanning the documents, the faces, the room itself. Then, with a voice that carried finality, he delivered the verdict. The court rules in favor of the petitioner. The divorce is granted. The gavel struck, the sound reverberating through the chamber. Her client gasped, tears streaming down her face. She clutched the lawyer's hand, whispering, "Thank you. Thank you for saving me." The lawyer forced a smile, her heart heavy. Victory had been achieved, but it tasted bitter. The inconsistencies still lingered in her mind, the anonymous warnings echoing in her ears. She had won, yes, but had she won for justice, or for a lie? The courtroom erupted in murmurs, people rising, papers shuffling. The opposing counsel shot her a look of disdain, as if to say, "You may have won today, but the truth will catch up to you." She gathered her files, her movements deliberate, her face composed. She walked out of the courtroom, her client beside her, reporters already gathering in the hallway. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted. How does it feel to win? What does this mean for victims of abuse? She answered calmly, her words polished, her tone professional. This is a victory for justice, for those who have suffered in silence. It is a reminder that the courts will listen, that the truth will prevail. But inside, her conscience whispered otherwise. As she stepped outside into the cool air, she felt the weight of the verdict pressing down on her. She had fought fiercely, argued passionately, and secured freedom for her client. Yet the cracks in the story remained, hidden beneath layers of testimony and evidence. She knew the battle was not over. The victory was real, but it was fragile. And soon, she would have to decide whether to protect it, or to dismantle it in pursuit of the truth. The office was still heavy with the echoes of victory. The lawyer had returned from court only hours earlier, her briefcase stuffed with documents, her mind replaying the gavel's strike that had sealed her client's freedom. Yet the triumph felt hollow. She sat at her desk, staring at the files as if they might rearrange themselves into clarity. The phone rang. She hesitated before answering, her hand hovering over the receiver. The number was unfamiliar, the digits stark against the glowing screen. Something inside her whispered caution, but curiosity won. Hello? The voice on the other end was calm, deliberate, almost clinical. You don't know me, but you need to listen carefully. Your client lied. Her breath caught. Who is this? That doesn't matter. What matters is the truth. Check the police records again. The dates don't match. The witnesses were coached. She's not a victim, she's a manipulator. The lawyer's pulse quickened. Why are you telling me this now? The case is over. Because justice isn't. You fought for her, but you fought for a lie. And lies have consequences. The line went dead. She sat frozen, the silence pressing against her ears. The words replayed, each syllable sharp as glass. She lied. She's a manipulator. Her eyes fell on the stack of documents. She pulled them closer, flipping through pages with trembling fingers. The hospital report again. The police statement. The witness affidavits. She circled dates, underlined times, highlighted contradictions. The discrepancies were undeniable. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text. She's lying. Don't let her fool you. No sender. No trace. Just words, stark and chilling. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights hummed above, indifferent to her turmoil. She thought of her client's tears in court, the trembling voice, the desperate plea for freedom. She had believed it all. She had fought for it all. And now, it threatened to unravel. Her conscience screamed. She had sworn an oath to uphold justice, to protect truth. But what if she had become complicit in a deception? What if her victory was built on falsehood? She picked up the phone again, dialing her paralegal. Still working? The voice asked, cheerful. Yes, she replied, her tone heavy. I need you to recheck the police records. Cross-reference the dates with the hospital admission. Something doesn't add up. A pause. You think she lied? I don't know. But I need to be sure. She hung up, her hands shaking. The office felt colder now, the shadows deeper. She pulled the mediation notes from the pile, scanning them for clues. The opposing counsel had hinted at inconsistencies, subtle jabs she had dismissed as tactics. Perhaps they had seen what she refused to see. Her phone rang again. Another unknown number. She answered, her voice sharp. Who are you? The voice was different this time, softer, almost sympathetic. You're a good lawyer. Too good to be dragged into her lies. She used you. She used the system. Don't let her win twice. Her throat tightened. Why should I believe you? Because the truth is already in your hands. You just haven't admitted it yet. The line went dead once more. She slammed the phone down, frustration boiling. Anonymous voices, cryptic warnings, contradictions in documents, her world was spinning. She needed clarity, proof, something solid to anchor her. She opened her laptop, pulling up the case files, cross-referencing dates, times, statements. The inconsistencies multiplied. Witnesses contradicted each other. Timelines overlapped impossibly. Even the photographs seemed staged, their angles suspicious, their lighting unnatural. Her stomach churned. She thought of the judge's verdict, the gavel's strike, the courtroom's silence. She had stood there, victorious, her client free. But now, victory felt like betrayal. Her phone buzzed again, another text. Investigate her. You'll see. She exhaled sharply, her resolve hardening. She would not ignore this. She would dig deeper, even if it meant dismantling her own case. The office clock ticked loudly, each second a reminder of the weight pressing down on her. She sat again, her fingers tracing the edges of the documents. She thought of the oath she had sworn, the promise she had made to uphold justice. Justice. The word echoed in her mind, heavy, unforgiving. She closed her eyes, imagining the courtroom again, the faces, the voices, the verdict. She imagined herself standing there, victorious, her client free. But the image twisted, warped, until victory became betrayal, and freedom became fraud. Her phone buzzed once more. Another message, she's not who she says she is. She stared at the words, her heart pounding. The office felt suffocating now, the walls closing in. She gathered the files, stacking them neatly, her movements deliberate. Tomorrow, she would confront her client. Tomorrow, she would demand answers. Tomorrow, she would fight not for victory, but for truth. She turned off the desk lamp, leaving the room in dim light. As she reached for her coat, she glanced once more at the documents. They seemed to stare back at her, silent witnesses to a truth she had yet to fully grasp. Her reflection in the window caught her eye, tired, determined, haunted. She saw not just a lawyer, but a guardian of justice, standing at the edge of betrayal. And she knew, deep down, that the battle ahead would not be against an abusive husband, but against the very client she had sworn to protect. The office was a battlefield of paper. Stacks of files rose like fortresses on her desk, each one a silent witness to the case she had fought and won. Yet tonight, victory felt like a fragile illusion. The lawyer sat hunched over, her pen tapping against the margin of a police report, her eyes scanning for the truth hidden between lines of ink. The phone calls still echoed in her mind, anonymous voices warning her, urging her to look closer. And now, as she spread the documents across the desk, she realized they had not lied. The inconsistencies were there, glaring, undeniable. She pulled the hospital report closer. March 12th. Her client had sworn the incident occurred on March 15th. Trauma could distort memory, yes, but 3 days was not a slip, it was a fracture. She circled the date, her pen pressing hard enough to tear the paper. Next, the police statement. The officer had logged the call at 9 p.m. Her client testified it was midnight. She underlined the times, her stomach tightening. She leaned back, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting a sterile glow over the chaos of her desk. She closed her eyes, replaying the courtroom scene, the trembling voice, the tears, the desperate plea for freedom. She had believed it all. She had fought for it all. And now, it threatened to collapse. Her conscience whispered, "You won, but did you win for justice?" She stood, pacing the office, her heels clicking against the floor. The walls, lined with certificates and framed degrees, seemed to accuse her, reminding her of the oath she had sworn. She had built her career on integrity, on truth. And now, truth itself seemed to be slipping through her fingers. She returned to the desk, pulling out witness affidavits. She read them slowly, carefully, her eyes catching contradictions she had overlooked before. One witness claimed to have seen bruises on her client's arm on March 10th. Another swore the injuries appeared only after March 15th. The timelines overlapped impossibly. Her pen scratched across the paper, circling, underlining, annotating. The more she looked, the more the cracks widened. She opened her laptop, pulling up digital records. She cross-referenced hospital logs with police reports, witness statements with photographs. The inconsistencies multiplied. Even the photographs seemed staged, the angles suspicious, the lighting unnatural. Her stomach churned. She thought of the judge's verdict, the gavel's strike, the courtroom's silence. She had stood there, victorious, her client free. But now, victory felt like betrayal. Her phone buzzed, a message from her paralegal. Cross-checked the records. "You're right. The dates don't align." She exhaled sharply, her resolve hardening. She would not ignore this. She would dig deeper, even if it meant dismantling her own case. She pulled out the mediation notes, scanning them for clues. The opposing counsel had hinted at inconsistencies, subtle jabs she had dismissed as tactics. Perhaps they had seen what she refused to see. She picked up the phone, tempted to call her client, to demand answers. But she stopped herself. Confrontation without proof would only push her further into lies. She needed evidence, something undeniable. She opened her laptop again, searching public records, financial statements, employment logs. She traced her client's movements, her history, her connections. Patterns emerged, patterns of manipulation, of deception, of carefully crafted lies. Her heart pounded. She thought of the oath she had sworn, the promise she had made to uphold justice. Justice was not about winning. Justice was about truth. And truth demanded sacrifice. The office clock ticked loudly, each second a reminder of the weight pressing down on her. She sat again, her fingers tracing the edges of the documents. She imagined the courtroom again, the faces, the voices, the verdict. She imagined herself standing there, victorious, her client free. But the image twisted, warped, until victory became betrayal, and freedom became fraud. Her phone buzzed once more, another anonymous text. Investigate her. You'll see. She stared at the words, which seemed to stare back at her, silent witnesses to a truth she had yet to fully grasp. The mediation room was sterile, designed to strip emotion from conflict. A long oak table stretched across the center, polished to a sheen that reflected the fluorescent lights above. The chairs were arranged neatly, each one a silent invitation to negotiation. Yet tonight, the room felt less like a place of compromise and more like a battlefield. The lawyer entered first, her briefcase heavy with documents, her mind heavier still with the weight of truth. She had spent nights combing through files, cross-referencing dates, unraveling lies. And now, she was ready. Ready not to defend, but to confront. Her client arrived moments later, escorted by a mediator. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around the room, her hands clutching a folder as if it were a shield. She sat across from the lawyer, the table a barrier between them. The mediator cleared his throat. We are here to discuss outstanding matters related to the case. This is a space for dialogue, not conflict. The lawyer nodded, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. Dialogue requires truth. And truth is what we must address. Her client shifted uncomfortably. I don't understand. We already won. The judge ruled in my favor. Yes, the lawyer replied, her voice steady. But victory built on lies is no victory at all. The mediator frowned. Perhaps we should begin with specifics. The lawyer opened her briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents. She spread them across the table, each page a weapon, each line of ink a blade. Hospital records, she said, tapping the first file. Admission date, March 12. You testified the incident occurred on March 15. That's not a slip of memory. That's a contradiction. Her client's face paled. I must have misremembered. She slid another document forward. Police report. Call logged at 9 p.m. You swore it was midnight. Again, not a slip. A deliberate distortion. Her client's hands trembled. You don't understand. Trauma. Trauma does not invent timelines, the lawyer interrupted, her tone sharp. Witness statements contradict each other. Photographs appear staged. The evidence does not support your story. It dismantles it. The mediator raised a hand. Let's remain calm. But calm was impossible. The air was charged, the table vibrating with tension. Her client leaned forward, desperation in her eyes. You promised to fight for me. You promised to protect me. I promised to fight for justice, the lawyer replied coldly. And justice cannot exist without truth. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Her client's voice broke the stillness, trembling but defiant. You don't know what it's like. You don't know what I've endured. The lawyer's gaze was unyielding. Then tell me. Tell me the truth. Not the rehearsed story. Not the fabricated timeline. The truth. Her client looked away, her eyes fixed on the polished surface of the table. Her reflection stared back at her, distorted, fractured. The mediator shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should adjourn. No, the lawyer said firmly. We finish this now. She pushed another document forward. financial records, employment logs, public statements. They all point to manipulation. You crafted a narrative, not a testimony. You used me. You used the system. Her client's composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling onto the table. I had no choice. I needed freedom. I needed protection. You needed power, the lawyer countered. And you sought it through deception. The mediator leaned back, his face pale. He had seen conflicts before, but never one so raw, so personal. Her client's voice rose, trembling with anger. You betrayed me. You were supposed to be on my side. I was on the side of justice, the lawyer replied, her tone icy. And justice demands accountability. The room fell silent again, the tension thick enough to choke. Her client's tears turned to fury. You'll regret this. You think you can turn against me? I'll fight back. I'll destroy you. The lawyer's expression did not waver. You cannot destroy truth. You can only delay it. And tomorrow, I will take this truth to court. Not to defend you, but to prosecute you. Her client's face twisted in rage, her hands slamming against the table. You're a hypocrite. You won because of me. You stood in court and fought for me. And now you want to undo it all? Yes, the lawyer said simply. Because lies cannot stand. Because justice cannot be compromised. Because my oath is stronger than your deception. The mediator rose, his voice trembling. This session is over. But the confrontation was not. The lawyer gathered her documents, her movements deliberate, her resolve unshaken. She looked at her client one last time, her eyes cold, her voice firm. Tomorrow, the battle begins again. Not for your freedom, but for the truth you tried to bury. And I will fight, not for you, but against you. She turned, leaving the room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Her client sat frozen, her tears staining the table, her reflection fractured in the polished wood. The mediator sighed, his hands trembling. He had witnessed many conflicts, but none so devastating. The lawyer walked out into the night, the cool air biting against her skin. She felt no relief, no triumph, only the weight of the battle ahead. She had won once, but now she would fight again. Not for victory, but for redemption. And she knew, deep down, that the courtroom would soon become a battlefield once more. The courtroom was colder than she remembered. Perhaps it was the weight of what she carried this time, or perhaps it was the silence that hung heavier than before. The lawyer sat at her table, her files neatly stacked, her pen poised like a blade. But unlike the last trial, she was not here to defend. She was here to prosecute. Her former client sat across the aisle, no longer trembling in feigned vulnerability but rigid, defiant, her eyes burning with resentment. The tables had turned, and the woman who once whispered gratitude now glared with venom. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise." The judge entered, robes flowing, face stern and unreadable. Everyone stood, the ritual heavy with meaning. When the judge sat, the room followed, and silence fell like a curtain. The opposing counsel rose first, representing the woman who had once been her client. His voice was sharp, his tone defensive. Your Honor, this is nothing more than retaliation. My client sought freedom from abuse, and now she is being persecuted for daring to speak out. The lawyer listened, her jaw tight, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. She had anticipated this. She had prepared for this. When he sat, she rose, her presence commanding, her voice steady. Your Honor, she began, this is not retaliation. This is accountability. The evidence presented in the previous trial was fabricated. The testimony was rehearsed. The documents were manipulated. We are not here to silence a victim. We are here to expose a fraud. She walked slowly toward the bench, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She held up the hospital records, the police reports, the witness statements. Each piece of evidence was presented with deliberate care, her words weaving them into a narrative not of suffering, but of deception. Her former client's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. The lawyer turned to the witness stand. "Were the police officer now Saturday tell us," she said firmly, "what time was the call logged?" 9 p.m., the officer replied. "And yet the defendant testified it was midnight. Can you explain the discrepancy?" "There is no discrepancy in our records," the officer said. "The call was made at 9 p.m. precisely." The lawyer nodded, her gaze shifting to the judge. "Your Honor, this is not trauma distorting memory. This is deliberate falsehood." She cross-examined witnesses, dismantling their credibility piece by piece. She highlighted contradictions in their accounts, questioned their motives, exposed their biases. Her questions were sharp, her tone unwavering. The opposing counsel objected, claiming exaggeration, but the judge allowed her to continue. Hours passed, the battle unfolding like a chess match. Each move calculated, each response measured. The lawyer felt the weight of her oath pressing against her, the responsibility to uphold truth gnawing at her resolve. Yet she pushed forward, driven by the momentum of justice, by the need to restore integrity. Finally, it was time for closing arguments. She stood tall, her voice firm. "Your Honor, justice is not blind to lies. It does not ignore deception. My former client sought to manipulate this court, to exploit the system, to gain freedom through falsehood. Today, you have the power to correct that injustice. To hold her accountable. To restore the dignity of this court." Her words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. The opposing counsel rose, delivering his own closing, but his arguments seemed weaker now, overshadowed by the weight of her evidence. The judge sat in silence for a moment, eyes scanning the documents, the faces, the room itself. Then, with a voice that carried finality, he delivered the verdict. "The court finds the defendant guilty of perjury and fraud. She is hereby sentenced to imprisonment." The gavel struck, the sound reverberating through the chamber. Her former client gasped, fury replacing fear. She slammed her hands against the table, shouting, "This isn't justice. This is betrayal." But the words fell flat, drowned by the echo of the gavel. The lawyer stood, her face composed, her heart heavy. Victory had been achieved, but it tasted bitter. She had fought fiercely, argued passionately, and secured accountability. Yet the scars of betrayal remained. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, people rising, papers shuffling. The opposing counsel shot her a look of disdain, as if to say, "You may have one today, but the cost will haunt you." She gathered her files, her movements deliberate, her resolve unshaken. She walked out of the courtroom, the cool air biting against her skin. Reporters gathered, cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. "How does it feel to win? What does this mean for the justice system?" She answered calmly, her words polished, her tone professional. "This is a victory for truth. It is a reminder that the courts will not be manipulated, that deception will not prevail." But inside, her conscience whispered otherwise. She had fought not just against a client, but against herself, against the part of her that had once believed, once defended, once stood in court and argued for lies. And though justice had been restored, she knew the battle had left scars that no verdict could heal.